Hello, very good morning. So, in the previous classes, we have already discussed about cognitive behavioral approaches to health behavior changes. So, we know that we have discussed about the factors which are coming under the cognitive behavioral approaches like cognitive behavior therapy, self monitoring, stimulus control, self reinforcement, self punishment, and behavioral assignments. So these are the areas, these are the components which comes under or factors comes under cognitive behavioral approaches to make the uh, behavioral change or health behavior changes. The other factor in the cognitive behavioral approach, that is giving behavioral assignments. So it is a technique for increasing client involvement in behavioral assignment, that is home practice activities that support the goals of a therapeutic interventions. So behavioral assignment, that is a technique that given to the client for that they should be involved with the behavioral assignments. That is they will be giving some of the works related to home practice or some other activities that should support the therapies what the practitioner or the psychologist are advised. So behavioral assignments are designed to provide continuity in the treatment of a behavior problem. So why these behavioral assignments are given to the client? That just because it should get a continuity in the treatment of a behavioral problems. So for example, if an early session with an obese client involved training in self-monitoring, the client would be encouraged to keep a log of his eating behavior, including the circumstances in which it occurred. So if a client comes with a case of obese to the psychologist, so they had given the behavioral assignment as self monitoring. That is the behavioral assignment that has given to the client by the psychologist, and the client would be encouraged to keep a log for this behavior, that is his eating behavior. So how it is being happened, including the what are the situations it should be happened. So this will help the client as well as it will help the psychologist to get a continuity in the treatment of a behavioral problem. So we are going to deal with the one of the model and the health psychology, that is for modifying the health behavior. So that is a health belief model. So an early influential attitude theory of why people practice health behavior is the health belief model. So according to this model, whether a person practices a health behavior depends on two factors. The first one is whether the person perceives a personal health threat, and the second one is whether the person believes that a particular health practice will be effective in reducing the threat which he have faced or she have been facing. So it has been proposed that health belief model has been proposed by Hawkbound in 1958 and Rosen in 1966. So it is the model which have emerged for the changing health habits or changing health behavior. So in this model, it mainly practices or it depends on mainly two factors. So whether the person perceives a personal health threat, or the person is having or she or he is perceiving any personal threat. Health threat means any disorders or any diseases, and whether the person believes that a particular health practice will be effective in reducing that threat. So he believes himself or herself believe that some of the health practices will be helpful for reducing the threat he or she is having. So mainly there are some factors in the individual side or in the perception side, that is perceived health threat. So the perception of a personal health threat is influenced by at least three factors. So that is general health values, which includes interest in and concern about health, specific beliefs about personal vulnerability to a particular disorder, and beliefs about the consequences of the disorder, such as whether they are serious or not. So these are the main influencing three factors which is related to perception of a personal health threat. Thus, for example, people may change their diet due to include low cholesterol foods if they value health. So how it is being connected, here we are having an example for that, and how they value the health, it is all related to the general health value. Feel threatened by the possibility of heart disease. So it is something which include the interest in concern about the health, or specific beliefs about personal vulnerability to a particular disorder, and perceive that the personal threat of heart disease is severe. So when comes into the third area, that feel threatened by the possibility of heart disease, and the third one is what will be the consequences of the disorder, such as whether they are serious or not. That is to perceive that the personal threat of heart disease is severe. So there are mainly two factors which comes under perceived health threat, that is perceived susceptibility and perceived severity. That is the first one, that is perceived susceptibility, that is beliefs about one's chance of getting a condition. So it is a belief of that person or that individual, that once whether they have getting a chance, that is belief about one's chance of getting a condition, that is a disorder or any diseases. And perceived severity means it is the beliefs about how serious the condition might be, how it will be, how it will takes place, what will be the how much serious it can be reached. So that is the belief about how serious the condition might be happening. So that is related to perceived health threat, which is based on two areas, perceived susceptibility and perceived severity. So the other area of perceived health, or in the side of a perception, that is perceived threat reduction, that is whether a person believe a health measure will reduce threat, has two subcomponents. Whether for the first one is whether the person thinks the health practice will be effective, and whether the cost of undertaking that measure exceeds its benefits. So for example, if you connecting that, the man who is considering changing his diet to avoid a heart attack may believe that dietary change alone would not reduce his risk of a heart attack, and that changing his diet would interfere with his enjoyment of life too much to justify taking the action. So even if his perceived vulnerability to heart disease is great, he would probably not make any changes. So that is what is happening with the example, or that is connected to perceived threat reduction, that is how the person is having threat and how he is being ready to reduce that health threat. So from the example we easily understand how it is being connected to the beliefs of the person in the case of perceived threat reduction, that is whether the person thinks the health practice will be effective, and how it will be whether the cost of undertaking the measures which will whether it is exceeds its benefit of that. So here we can see that the person is having taking the dietary or having the diet on to avoid the heart attack. So he, at the same time also he believes that if the dietary changes alone would not reduce the risk of a heart attack. So it can happen in any other way also it will be happening. So at the same time he think of that it will also interfere with the enjoyment of his life. So uh, altogether when he going to connect with this, so what he perceived that, so even if his perceived vulnerability to heart disease is great, he would not probably not make any changes in his health behavior. That is, he may go with the continuous process of what he has been experienced. So it may, why it is done so, because it may affect the, or it may interfere with the with his enjoyment of his life also. Yes, here in this picture we can see that, or we can understand that how health belief model is being done. So in the first side, that is the individual perceptions, or it is all related to the perception of the individual. So that is perceived susceptibility to a disease, and the other one is perceived severity of disease. So these all we have, these 2 points comes under individual perception, and that we have discussed under uh, perceived health threat. And in the second area, that is modifying factors, which are the factors has to be modified, that is age, gender, and personality, socioeconomic status, knowledge of the person, and self efficacy also. For controlling the self efficacy, we should go for finding out the self efficacy, we have to go for uh, understanding the perceived benefits of behavioral change minus perceived. So that brings self efficacy brings the gap between perceived benefit of health change, behavioral change, and perceived barriers to behavioral change. And in the second part you can see that the modifying factors like age, personality, socioeconomic status, knowledge, and self efficacy, but this leads to perceived threat of disease. And in the case of perceived severity of disease, also it leads to perceived threat of disease. And cues to action, that is education or symptoms of media, these all again it will lead to the perceived threat of disease. So from this, the likelihood of action which is happened is perceived benefit of behavioral change minus perceived barriers to behavioral changes. So this will lead to the likelihood of the action takes place, that is likelihood of behavioral change can happen due to the perceived benefit of behavioral change uh, minus the perceived barriers of behavioral change, as well as reducing the health threat, that is perceived severity of disease, and some of the cues to action against perceived threat of disease. So that is modifying the perceived threat of disease will lead to likelihood of or desired behavioral changes can be happen. So this is how this health belief model is being presented here.